Hello, my name is Henrietta Clark. I'm 79 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family meant forever, that love guaranteed loyalty. But life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect it. After a diagnosis changed everything, I watched my own children treat me like I was already gone. They divided my life, my legacy, before I'd even taken my last breath. But what they didn't know is that I had already changed my will. If you've ever been made to feel invisible or discarded by the very people you once held closest, this story is for you. Like this video if you believe every woman deserves dignity, at any age. Comment below if you've ever had to reclaim your voice. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to know how far this story travels. I remember the color of the walls more than the words, that sterile shade of cream that every hospital paints over fear. The doctor was kind. Young, maybe 30, with soft eyes and a voice that danced carefully around the truth. The tests show early-stage lymphoma, he said. Slow-growing, manageable, but not curable. He used words like comfortable and palliative, and I nodded along like I wasn't dying, just negotiating a long lease with an unreliable landlord. I didn't cry. That's the funny thing about getting older. You don't weep when expected. I just folded the appointment card, thanked him, and asked if I could still drive myself home. He offered to call someone. I declined. But when I told Julia and Graham, my daughter and son, something shifted. They didn't cry either. Julia looked away, fiddling with her phone. Graham asked, how much time do you have? No hug, no hand to hold mine. Then Julia leaned forward and said, Mom, maybe we should start thinking about logistics. You know, the house, the bank accounts, just in case. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw it. That flicker of calculation. It passed quickly, masked by a soft smile, but I caught it. Graham cleared his throat. You've got a big place, Mom. Alone. You think you'd be more comfortable downsizing? Comfortable. There was that word again. I smiled, not at them, but at the memory of my husband, Frank. He'd always said, when they start talking, comfort, watch your back. It usually means they want something. The visit ended early. Julia said she had to pick up Lily from piano practice. Graham had a Zoom call. They left me with hugs that didn't reach their shoulders and promises to check in soon. That night, I sat by the fireplace in the house Frank built with his own hands. The logs hissed, and I thought about that word again. Downsize. Funny. They didn't ask if I was scared, or if I wanted company. They just assumed I'd be stepping out of the way. And maybe I had been. For too long. The days that followed my diagnosis were strangely quiet, as if time itself had stepped back, unsure how to move forward. The phone, once so lively with voices and check-ins, fell silent. When it did ring, it was no longer the warm, familiar voices of my children, but appointment reminders, pharmacy notices, or the occasional neighbor asking if I'd be attending Sunday service. Julia sent a message. Just a message. Thinking of you. So much on our plates lately. We'll call soon. Graham didn't bother with even that. My house, once filled with laughter, the clatter of cutlery, and the aroma of Sunday roasts, now echoed with stillness. I'd always left the back door slightly ajar for the breeze, and sometimes I'd imagine it was Frank coming in, calling, Henrietta, you'll let all the heat out. But no one came. A week later, Julia texted again. Oops! Realized we forgot to loop you in. We had a quick dinner at our place with everyone. Just pizza. Nothing special. She included a blurry photo. The table was full. Julia, her husband, Greg, Graham, his new girlfriend, and the kids. Lily, my granddaughter, smiled wide with her braces still fresh, holding a slice of pepperoni. No seat saved for me. No call to invite. I didn't reply. I decided to take matters into my own hands. That Sunday, I planned a small brunch. Nothing fancy, just quiche, a fruit platter, and the cinnamon rolls Lily used to beg me to make. I even put out the floral napkins I'd been saving since Frank's retirement party. The table looked lovely. Too lovely to be so empty. The clock ticked past noon, then 1. At 2:03, Julia texted, "So sorry. Greg has a migraine. We're staying in." No word from Graham. I ate a roll myself, the icing already cold. Then I cleared the table in silence, folding the napkins back into the drawer like nothing had happened. After the dishes were done, I sat in Frank's old chair by the window. He used to call it his thinking spot. From there, you could see the roses we planted the year Lily was born. They were fading now, all bloom and no color. Later that week, I was in the living room, dusting the photo frames along the mantel, when I heard Lily's voice floating down the hall. She'd come over briefly to drop off a school fundraiser. The front door was ajar. She thought I wasn't nearby. "Yeah," she was saying into her phone. "Grandma's fading, I guess. We'll probably get the lake house once she's, not around." Silence on the line. Then a giggle. "I mean, it's not like she uses it. Dad said it's just sitting there. Could be such a cool party house." My hand froze on the photo of our wedding. Frank in his gray suit, me in a handmade veil, both of us smiling with youth we didn't yet know was precious. I didn't confront her. She wouldn't have understood the weight of what she'd said. She left a few minutes later with a juice box from the fridge and a distracted hug. That night, I found myself wandering through the hallway closet. The scent of cedar and mothballs filled the air. I reached up to the high shelf where I kept the memory box, the one Frank and I had always meant to organize but never quite had the heart to open. Inside were photos, letters, Frank's cufflinks, and an envelope addressed to me in his tidy, looping handwriting. I didn't open it. Not yet. Just seeing his handwriting again was like touching a warm hand through glass. Instead, I sat with the photo of us at the lake house, taken the summer after Julia's birth. I remembered the way he carved our initials into the porch post and said, "This place will be theirs one day, if they remember what it meant to us." And now? Now it was just real estate to them, party potential. A listing in waiting. I placed the photo gently beside the lamp, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark, "Would you believe this, Frank?" It was a question I didn't need answered, because somewhere inside me, something had begun to turn. Not hatred, not even anger, but something firmer. A spine straightening. A wind shifting. They had already decided what was mine. What they were owed. What I had left. But they didn't know what I still held. And they certainly didn't know what I was willing to protect. I always liked to keep my birthday quiet. A homemade cake, Frank's old jazz records humming from the record player, maybe a family dinner where the grandkids squirmed in their chairs waiting for dessert. I never asked for gifts. I never needed much. But this year felt different. Maybe because I knew, deep in my chest, in that place where the diagnosis still echoed, that there might not be many more. So I thought, maybe they'd show up. Maybe they'd remember. I woke up early that morning, washed my hair, and pulled out the rose-pink dress Frank loved. It was a bit snug at the waist now, but it still made me feel like me. I baked the same lemon cake Julia used to beg for when she was little. I even added extra glaze, the way Lily liked. I laid out the good plates and polished the silver. At Grossy, I lit the vanilla candle in the hallway. At 6:30, I put on Frank's favorite record, a scratchy old pressing of Autumn in New York. It crackled like a fireplace. I smiled, just a little. By 7:45, I was still alone, not even a phone call, just a stale hum of silence. At exactly 8:03, my phone buzzed, a text from Julia. So sorry. Caught up with life. Will make it up to you. Love you. No call, no apology. Just a message. Short, light, like my birthday was some forgotten item on a to-do list. I stared at the screen for a long while. Then I deleted the message. Not angrily, not with a dramatic huff. Just gone. I opened the wine by myself. The one Frank had saved for our 50th, though we never made it that far. I poured it into one of the crystal glasses we got as a wedding gift. The first sip stung. The second warmed. I sat at the dining table, staring at 6 empty chairs, and felt something inside me harden. Not with bitterness, but with understanding. They didn't forget. They just didn't care enough to remember. And that's a different kind of pain. After a while, I rose and walked to the old oak desk in the study. It still smelled like Frank. Leather, cedar, a hint of the pipe tobacco he only used on holidays. I pulled open the bottom drawer. It creaked. It always did. I shuffled through old files, tax folders, and yellowing insurance policies until I found the one with Frank's handwriting. House, trust docs, and estate planning. There was a post-it still stuck to the folder. Henrietta, read this if things ever get complicated. I hadn't touched it in years. I always trusted him to handle the complicated things. He was good with money. I was good with people. That was the balance. But now the people had left me. And the money? They were already circling like vultures. I sat back down, folder on my lap, fingers tracing over Frank's words. I remembered a night, maybe 10 years ago, when he'd told me we should revise the will together. You never know, Henrietta, he'd said. You want to be the one holding the pen. I brushed him off, told him we had time. He died 2 winters later. I opened the folder. Inside were deeds, bank accounts, the original will, and, tucked between 2 envelope flaps, a typed amendment draft that had never been signed. But it was dated, and it clearly stated that the lake house, in the event of his death, was to be left solely to me, and that any future changes should be made under my full authority. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. But when I found it, something in me steadied. Later that night, I took the folder to the kitchen, set it on the table, and lit a single candle. The lemon cake sat untouched beside it, the glaze beginning to crust. I poured another glass of wine, not out of celebration but clarity. I looked out at the garden, quiet, windless, and I whispered to the dark, I think it's time, Frank. Time I held the pen. It was the kind of rain that stayed. Not a storm, not a cleansing downpour, just steady gray drizzle that blurred the edges of the world. I had nothing on the calendar that day, no appointments, no drop-ins, and somehow, that made the house feel even more cavernous. I brewed tea. Chamomile. Frank always said it tasted like sleep. I used to find comfort in that. Now it just made me feel older. With the mug warm in my hands, I wandered the upstairs hallway without meaning to, pausing, in front of Graham's old bedroom. The door hadn't been opened in months, maybe longer. It still smelled faintly like cologne and linseed oil. He used to paint when he was in college. There were still 2 canvases leaning in the corner, one of a blue-gray mountain, the other of nothing in particular. I stepped inside and sat on the bed, the springs giving slightly under my weight. That's when I saw it. The desk drawer slightly open. Curious more than anything, I pulled it gently. Inside were papers. At first, I assumed they were old school. Forms, maybe tax documents from when he was in graduate school. But the date said otherwise. Recent. As recent as March, and the names on them. Mine. My name. My birth date. My bank. My house. The first was a full printout of my last 3 months of bank statements, highlighted, with notes scribbled in the margins. Autopay, Utilities. Excess? Transfer here? The second was a copy of the deed to the lake. House. The same one Frank and I bought with a cashier's check the summer before Julia was born. There were sticky tabs marking sections titled Joint Tenancy and Beneficiary Rights. Then came the third, a blank power of attorney form. Filled out, except for one line, my signature. There was a note clipped to it, in Graham's handwriting. Ask her to sign during brunch. Julia says it'll be easier if we already have it in place. I stopped breathing. Brunch. The brunch? No. One came to. The papers trembled in my hands. I don't know if it was from shock or rage, or betrayal. Probably all three. I placed them neatly back in the drawer, not to hide them, but because I suddenly understood. They thought I was drifting. That I wouldn't notice. That I'd go quietly. But I wasn't gone. And I was done pretending. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the memory box again. Not the one with the wedding photos. The other one, the practical one. The one Frank, labeled Legal, Important Docs. Tucked inside a manila folder, worn thin at the edges, was the unsigned will draft Frank had written just months before his death. I'd seen it once before. He said he wanted me to have everything clean and clear in case something ever happened to him. It granted me sole authority over all financial assets and property, no joint control, no early transition of power, just my name and a clause. At the bottom, in bold type, to remain valid unless otherwise legally amended with consent of spouse. It had never been signed. Life got in the way, then the diagnosis, then hospice. But it was typed, notarized, and included as an official attachment to the file he'd given to his attorney, Henry Wilkins. Henry. Of course, I hadn't spoken to Henry in nearly 4 years. After Frank passed, there wasn't much need. But I still had his card tucked inside my recipe binder, next to the page for lemon bars. I called him that afternoon. The rain was still falling, a soft percussion against the kitchen windows. Picked up after the second ring. Henry Wilkins speaking. Henry, I said slowly. It's Henrietta Clark, Frank's wife. A pause, then a warm, surprised, Henrietta. Goodness, it's been ages. I was just thinking of Frank the other day. How are you holding up? I've seen better days, I said, and my voice must have cracked in just the right way, because he replied gently, What's going on? We met the next day at a cafe on the edge of town, quiet, private. He looked older, a little rounder, in the middle, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. I brought the folder. I didn't sugarcoat. I laid everything out. The bank statements, the deed copy, the unsigned power of attorney, and Frank's old will draft. I didn't cry. I didn't falter. I just spoke. Henry listened the way good lawyers do, like he was taking in every breath. When I finished, he leaned back and sighed through his nose. They're preparing to assume legal and financial control before you're even gone. I nodded. And they're trying to do it quietly, he continued, tapping the corner of the POA form. Because they know if you catch on, you'd never allow it. So, I asked softly, is there anything I can do? Henry looked up at me with the steadiness of a man who had seen too many families torn apart by paper and pride. You still have time, Henrietta. But you'll need to act carefully, and quickly. We'll update everything, transfer assets to a trust, and ensure you retain full legal authority. But we'll do it quietly, no ripples, not yet. I sipped my tea and looked out at the parking lot, at the blurred reflections in puddles. Then I turned back to him and said, I'm ready. That night, I stood in my living room, lights dimmed, rain still ticking on the roof, and I looked around the house I'd spent 42 years calling home. The walls Frank painted by hand. The floorboards we laid together on a humid summer day. The fireplace where we once fell asleep with the dogs curled at our feet. This wasn't just property. This wasn't just brick and paper. This was the place. I built my life, and I wasn't handing it over like a passed-down casserole dish. From that night on, I moved differently. I no longer shuffled through rooms with soft steps. I stood straighter. My voice held firmer. I made lists. I opened new accounts. The house was no longer something I waited to leave behind. It became something I was preparing to protect, because they hadn't just underestimated me. They'd forgotten who I was before. I was Mom, before I was Grandma. They forgot that I had a mind sharpened by years, not dulled by them, and I was about to remind them. The first thing I did was rewrite the will. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. A decision made not in anger, but in reclamation. Henry and I sat across from each other in his office on a Thursday morning. The desk was polished, neat, and smelled faintly of cedar. He handed me the new draft and said gently, "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Henrietta." I took the pen. My hand didn't shake. With every signature, I felt a piece of myself, returning, a piece they'd quietly taken, little by little. In the new will, Julia and Graham were named only once, in a single line near the bottom. No further inheritance or trust allocation is to be extended to Julia Emerson or Graham Clark. Instead, I created something else. I named Diane, my caretaker who brought soup when I had the flu and stayed late to help with laundry, as executor. I left a portion to the garden fund at the local community college. Frank and I had planted a tree there once, and I started a scholarship, the Clark Foundation for Dignity in Aging, to help seniors going back to school or re-entering the workforce. Frank would have liked that, helping people grow late in life. He always believed we weren't done learning, not until the last breath. The next week I sold the lake house, not to a realtor, not to the open market, to a young couple with a toddler and a baby on the way, a nurse and a schoolteacher. I saw something in their eyes, that flicker Frank and I once had when we bought the place. A dream, still soft and unformed. They didn't haggle much. They called it home before the papers were signed. That was enough for me. I took the money, opened a new private account, and set up digital alerts that would never go to Julia's phone. No joint access, no hidden beneficiaries, no tricks. Then I moved on to the house. This house. The one with the creaky stairs and the plum tree Frank planted in the yard. I met with a real estate attorney and quietly transferred the deed into a living trust under my full control. The house couldn't be sold or accessed without my signed approval. Not now, not after. No loopholes. I stood outside after the paperwork was filed, staring up at the roofline as the wind rustled the shutters. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the house was mine again. Not something I was preserving for others. Not something borrowed or counted down. Mine. Somehow, once the legalities were done, the emotional repairs began. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet steps forward. I joined a book club for seniors. Every Tuesday at the library, we sat in a circle and talked about novels we half read and memories we half shared. One woman, Bernice, brought sugar cookies shaped like cats. Another man, Harold, a retired postman, had eyes so kind I wondered how I'd missed them all these years. And I began painting again. Watercolors. The kind that bled and blurred at the edges. I wasn't good, but I didn't care. The brush in my hand felt like breathing. Some days I painted the old garden bench. Other days I painted the tree outside the study window. Once I painted the lake house from memory, not as it looked now, but as it had on the day Frank carved our initials into the porch post. People started to see me differently. Or maybe I started to let myself be seen. At the cafe, the barista stopped calling me ma'am and started calling me Miss Clark. At the pharmacy, the tech asked about my painting. Even at the bank, The manager shook my hand like I wasn't just another old woman withdrawing her weekly cash. I'd spent so long shrinking in corners, smiling politely, waiting to be remembered. But now, I wasn't waiting. Julia called once that month. A short, perfunctory call. "How's everything, Mom?" she asked. "Oh, I'm just fine," I replied. Keeping busy. She didn't ask how or with whom. Graham texted once about a friend's daughter who needed a job. I didn't respond. They hadn't noticed anything yet. Not the missing lake house. Not the change in ownership. They thought I was still passive, still pliable. Let them. Some truths don't need announcement. They unfold. Like slow thunder. Like a final page turning. One evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of peppermint tea. The fireplace flickered low, casting golden shadows across the rug. I looked around. At the shelves Frank built. At the faded photos of our trips. At the oil painting Julia gave me back when she still saw me as more than a burden. I wasn't bitter. I was full. Full of choices. Full of breath. Full of a life they had tried to claim before it was finished. And as I stared into the fire, I smiled. Not out of revenge, but because I knew. The next time they asked me about what's next, I'd already be 10 steps ahead. I scheduled the gathering for a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day they usually reserved for errands and obligations. Not celebration, not sentiment. I made sure to word the invitation carefully. I'd like to have a short family meeting. Nothing urgent, but important. Julia texted back within 5 minutes. "Of course. We'll come by. Is this about the will?" I didn't reply. Graham responded hours later. "Sure. Can we make it quick? Megan has work." They arrived promptly at 2:00, which in itself was strange. They were never early unless they were expecting something. They came in with the energy of people preparing for something transactional. Julia wore a tight smile and carried a leather folder. Graham had his phone in hand. Megan and Greg followed quietly, clearly briefed, but uninvolved. I greeted them with a soft smile, ushered them into the parlor, and offered tea. They declined. Except Megan. She asked for chamomile. I liked her more in that moment than I ever had. The fire crackled softly as they sat, their postures stiff with expectation. I could feel the weight of their glances, darting around the room, toward the antique clock, the bookshelf with Frank's photo, the sideboard where a folder sat waiting. Then Henry walked in. Julia's expression shifted first, from confusion to suspicion. "Mom, what's he doing here?" she asked, gesturing toward Henry with her eyebrows. "He's here for clarity," I said, pouring my tea. "Please sit. This won't take long." I took my time, sat down slowly, looked at each of them. They didn't know it, but this was the most control I'd felt in years. Henry cleared his throat. "Mrs. Clark has asked me to read a summary of her estate adjustments and to document that all parties have been informed." "Adjustments?" Graham asked, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Yes," Henry said, opening the folder. "Beginning with the revocation of all prior inheritance. Designations involving Julia Emerson and Graham Clark." Julia's smile faltered. "Wait, what?" "Mom?" Graham said, sitting forward. "What does that mean?" Henry continued, calm and unwavering. "As of last month, all property has been placed in a trust under Mrs. Clark's sole control. The lake house has been legally sold. All accounts are secured privately. The new will names charitable beneficiaries and designated caretakers. Mrs. Clark retains full authority over all assets." I sipped my tea. Julia stood up. "You can't. Be serious, this is manipulation." "She's not in her right mind." Henry raised an eyebrow. "All of these decisions were made with legal counsel and full capacity. She initiated every change." Graham let out a dry laugh. "Why?" "So some strangers can have what we built together. As a family?" I met his gaze. My voice didn't rise. Built together? Graham, you haven't painted a wall in this house since you were 19. You printed out my bank statements behind my back. You left a blank power of attorney on my desk. His face flushed. That's not... And Julia, I said gently, turning to her. You decided the lake house was yours before I even stopped breathing. Lily called it a party house. You called me a burden. All of it behind smiles and texts. They both froze. The masks dropped. I stood up slowly. My legs didn't tremble. You divided my life, I said softly, before I was gone. You began counting what was yours, so I simply finalized what you started, but on my terms. Silence. The fire popped. I didn't do this out of spite, I continued. I did it to protect what mattered, and to remind myself that I'm still here, still thinking, still choosing. Julia's voice cracked. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm freeing myself. Greg cleared his throat awkwardly. Megan looked down at her lap. Henry closed the folder and stood. This meeting has been recorded and documented. Thank you all for your time. They didn't stay long after that. Graham left without a word. Julia tried to hug me, then stopped herself halfway, like she didn't know whether I still fit into the shape of mother. She said, You'll regret this. I said, I already regret waiting this long. And then I walked them to the door. The parlor was still when they left. No sound but the tick of the grandfather clock Frank had refinished in '87. I looked out the window. The clouds were parting. Just barely. I poured a fresh cup of tea, returned to my chair, and closed my eyes for a moment. There was no applause, no triumphant music. Just peace. A quiet I had earned. It's been 2 years. Not that anyone's counting, not anymore. Time feels different now. Lighter. Less like a countdown, and more like a quiet unfolding. I live in a small cottage now, one with white shutters and sun-warmed floors, just a 15-minute walk from the botanical garden. It's not grand. It doesn't echo with high ceilings or smell like decades of family holidays, but it breathes easily. So do I. The garden was a donation, a modest one. My name is on a plaque near the entrance, though I never point it out. In memory of Thomas Clark, who believed everything deserved a chance to bloom. That was Frank, always tending, always planting something he might never see grow. He'd wanted to plant a tree in our backyard the year before he passed. A sycamore. He said he liked their patience. He never got to plant it, but I did. I volunteer twice a week now, sometimes giving garden tours to school children, sometimes teaching budgeting classes to local women starting over. Divorcees, widows, women who never learned how to say no until life forced them to. They listen, not because I'm loud, but because I've lived. I write now, too. Essays, little reflections on aging and grace and boundaries. A local journal published one last winter. I called it The Cost of Being Nice. I think Frank would have grinned at the title. This morning, the light was soft and gold, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. I brought my tea to the bench beneath the sycamore. It's tall now, not towering, but proud. I placed my hand on its bark. It felt warm. A boy approached, maybe 17, in a pressed shirt with nervous hands. He had a letter in one and a worn backpack slung over the other. Mrs. Clark? He asked. I smiled. Yes? I'm Marcus. From the scholarship board? I just wanted to thank you and show you something. He handed me an envelope. Columbia University. Inside was his acceptance letter. His hands trembled. I felt my throat catch. Full ride, he said, his voice cracking a little. Because of what you started. I looked up at him, this boy with his future stretched out like sunlight. And all I could think of was how they tried to shrink me, shrink my choices, shrink my voice, shrink my worth into numbers on a spreadsheet. But here was proof that I hadn't shrunk at all. I'd grown, outward, into others, into something that would outlast me. I told Marcus I was proud of him, and I meant it with every beat of my heart. When he walked away, letter still clutched in hand, I looked back at the tree. The breeze stirred its branches. A few petals from the flower bed danced up around my ankles. I closed my eyes and thought of Frank, not as he was at the end, but as he looked that day on the porch, carving our initials into the railing, telling me, "You'll outlive us both. Henrietta, you've always had roots deeper than anyone knows." He was right. They tried to write my ending for me, but I had one more chapter to write, and this one was mine.